Hey everyone, Tony D with a new segment I'd like to call How I Fix Things. This is the Screenwriter Fix, and I'm going to use my screenwriting abilities to fix your famous franchises. Now, I already fixed Star Wars, I already fixed James Bond. Today, we're going to fix the DC Universe. Now, comic book universes are pretty easy to fix because the first thing you have is you have alternate universes in which you can just shift over to another universe and start fresh. But starting fresh, the challenge is they've done that quite a few times. And I wouldn't want to really reset the DC universe totally. The first thing you'd need to do is you'd have to do a reset that would stay. You would have to create a reset that would be for the long term because fans are sick of this constant resetting. So the way I would position it is I would explore the idea of multiple universes by saying that all universes exist. In other words, there is still a universe where Neil Adams' Batman exists and has been progressing. There's still a universe where the 90s Superman and Batman, Justice League still exists, where Keith Giffen's Justice League still exists, where all these versions of the characters still exist. They're all in their separate universes. So, and I would revisit them in this sort of reset. I wouldn't do it long. I would try to keep it to a minimum. I wouldn't want to overburden the fans with a lot of purchases. And the goal would be to reset the characters into their classic mode. But beyond that, the first order of business would not be to reintroduce every character that we already know, but to set the boundaries in terms of what things would happen from then on. Because the problem, as I see with the DC universe and all comic book universes really, is now they've sort of taken the continuity borders away, and it's allowed for this constant reimagining and rebooting of characters that really don't have a place. So, for instance, I was just complaining about Gotham High. Where does Gotham High, rate in the DC universe? It would be its own planet, Earth number, blah blah blah. And you'd have to do that in order to sort of isolate and compartmentalize that world so it doesn't interfere with the true Batman stories. And when you do that, you can then say, okay, here's a comic like an Elseworlds series, which would be a great series, just an Elseworlds regular book, regular floppy book where you could do a story if it's popular enough, if there's a demand for it, for Gotham High. And I think that would be a fun book. One issue of Gotham High would be fun. Not an entire series. Not a mini-series. See, part of this is not just the creative end, but it's the marketing and the business model that's the problem. Comic books are too expensive. So you can't just change things creatively and expect them to work in a business model that is essentially, in my opinion, not working. So you have to fix the business model. Number one, digital downloads are $1. Number two, regular paper comics, you got to lower the price probably to $2. So that's a fair price in my view. It's $1 for a digital download, but it's only $2 for your actual physical comic. Now, that would be an adjustment for the comic book stores who are going to be hurting after this crisis, but might come back. But if you can build the readership back up, then eventually you will have a situation where that doesn't matter because more comic book stores will open and the ones that survive will be better and stronger for it. It's about building the readership again. Forget everything else. You have to build a readership. Without readership, it's pointless. If you're going to have this company that just puts out comic books because you're just cranking out IPs in case you could turn them into TV shows and movies, and that's the only reason you have it, eventually that becomes a lost leader that in times of economic slowdown, and we're fast approaching one right now, the division will just kill it. They'll just say, well, no more comics. We're not making any money and we got to really cut back. What's losing us money? Oh, the comics? Yeah, forget all that. That's the problem with the model. The other problem, too, is because they're a corporate arm, a division of a major, major corporation, the profits don't matter. So even if you presented this to them, it's likely they don't want to go through the trouble of rearranging things because they don't really care about the profit. Even if you could bring them millions of dollars of profit, it's not enough as compared to the movies and TV shows. Therefore, they don't see the point in expending the time and energy in putting it into their comic division. But let's imagine that by some miracle, somebody in corporate says, okay, Mr. D, fix comics for us. Fix DC Comics for us. So I would go to that model. Or the other version, which I talked about in a previous video, is instead of publishing floppies, get rid of all the floppies and hunker down to anthology books only. So you'd have the House of Batman, the House of Superman, the House of Justice League. Let's see, what else in the DC universe? I guess you would have the House of Horror, or maybe Tales of Mystery, or whatever it was, or his House of Mystery. For like Swamp Thing and all the darker sort of Vertigo-esque type books. I maybe would bring back Vertigo again, except bring it back as a comic book. Vertigo 1, Vertigo 2, Vertigo 3. And each of these monthly books would have 4 or 5 comics. I think the number would be 5 to 6 comics. You'd want to put a lot in there. 5 new comics, let's say, and 1 classic reprint. Because the idea is you just want to pack it full of stuff so fans go, well, this is too good of a deal for me to pass up. And the price point is $4.99. So it's 5 comics, essentially $1 a piece, but you're only getting 1 cover, and initially people are going to scoff and say, well, where's the collectability here? I don't collect these giant books. I only collect floppies. But see, you have to eliminate the floppies completely in order to make this work, to basically say to the fans, this is the new format. And the great thing about that format is, first off, you only need 1 cover. So now you can spend probably slightly more money on a cover. So your Brian Boland cover goes a lot further, because instead of selling 1 comic, you're really selling 5. You can also not worry about page length anymore. So instead of comics being, say, well, they got to be 22 pages, now they could be about 22 pages. So some guys could go a little long, some guys can go a little short. It doesn't really matter as long as the book itself is a big book. You can also now sell it more as a magazine. The price point is higher, it's thicker, it can now compete on a magazine stand with actual magazines, even though they're not much of a thing anymore. They still have a bit of a newsstand distribution. They're still out there. And now, when you put these newer, thicker comics on the newsstand, they look like something. They look like something, oh, okay, I could either pay $5 for this, or $5 for Maxim magazine, or $5 for heavy metal, or whatever. And so you're now competing. And initially, and this is the real hurdle here, that's going to be a loss leader. But if the people in marketing targeted not just comic book stores, but targeted Walmart and all these other avenues, and pushed hard to get back into drugstores, pushed hard to get back into the kind of stores that could sell, GameStop, any of these stores, you push hard to get back into these stores, you can again build the readership, because now you're offering a product with a really great return. Now, creatively, you had to hit the reset button and go back to classic. So it's classic Batman, classic Superman, classic Justice League. The main characters doing the things they do best. And you might say, well, what about all the crazy woke stuff? It's not a problem. Have a comic called DC Future. And you can have all that future woke crap in there. Like, the guy who takes over for Batman, the guy who takes over for Superman, the guy who takes over for Green Lantern, whatever. Or the non-binary person, whatever, you know what I'm saying. You can put all that woke crap in one book. And it may or may not sell. You could and then you could pull out things like Batman and Beyond. Throw that in there. You could put out inventory stories that, don't really connect into anything or were written at a time when the continuity was different, and you could finally use them and make some money on them. But the main thing you do is you change the business model to give the fan some more bang for their buck. Now, when you read Batman and you read the House of Batman, you know that the fans are not just reading Detective or just Batman or just those two. They're reading the entire thing in the House of Batman. They know what's going on in Gotham that month. And that's more exciting because you're getting more of a story. And if you coordinate it right, you get the continuity back. And that needs to be a priority too in editorial. You need to have a continuity. It's the whole point of reading all this stuff is so it's a window into a world that's functional. So when you look into that world, you want to see in House of Batman how it connects to House of Superman if they have a crossover, which they inevitably will, right? When you get to House of Justice League, you'll get the little note, this takes place after Detective Comics number blah, blah, blah. And you can continue with that numbering within the big comic. Within the House of Batman, House of Superman, House of whatever, you can continue the regular numbering, go past 1,000 or whatever, it doesn't matter. The numbers don't matter. What matters is the readership matters. And this would grow the readership again. And if you get stuck and you're having a bad month, you can afford to do, hey, here's the side view of the Batcave. And you could do 16 pages of that inside one of these comics. It's not even a comic, but you get a different kind of thing every week. Then you'd have that flexibility in editorial to do a different kind of story. You could do a Robin story that doesn't take place where Robin is constantly fighting people. He's just dealing with his dad or something different like that. Something that would appeal to kids. And by the way, these books were aimed at kids. Now, we have to acknowledge that at least 50% of the audience is above the age of 18. And we have to sort of keep it in that realm so kids can read it too. It was initially cheap kids entertainment, and that's what we have to focus on. This YA stuff, this is aimed at girls, okay? That's not where our audience is. Our audience is with mostly men. It's a higher percentage. Now, you can certainly have women who read comics. A few of them do. But the majority of the audience is men. So it has to cater more towards men. I would skew it back towards men a bit. Not totally. You could have a book for women, certainly. I would certainly welcome a book like that. But you have to acknowledge that it's probably not going to sell very much. And then you're going to have to adjust accordingly. And if it's not a big seller, it probably will eventually get canceled. And taking your woke ideas just because you want desperately for women to read comics and jamming them into a book that's aimed at men isn't the answer. The answer is you have to build the audience of women from the ground up. One of the biggest female readership comics over at Marvel was Barbie. And that's a very girly comic, and it appealed to very young girls. That's what DC needs. They need comics like that to build the audience through the years. A comic that would appeal to them at a very young age. So when they move up, then you could bring them into Birds of Prey, Batgirl or whatever. And then hopefully they'll come into not just the girl-aimed comic, but the House of Batman or House of whatever. You can have a House of Birds of Prey. Why not? Female superheroes. The guys would read that too, but you have to, be careful with that. It can't be too girly. It can't be too guy-centric. Has to be sort of in the middle there, so it has like a broad appeal. And ultimately, we would want to keep these characters static, okay? We want to keep them like The Simpsons. We don't want to age them, okay? Because that is a road that eventually ends, and you get stuck and you have to do one of these resets. So eliminate the reset button by focusing more on new villains, new things coming into that world, as opposed to constantly saying, well, here's a revelation. It turns out Batman's not Batman, or Robin's not Robin, or this guy's alive and this guy's dead. That kind of personal development is a dead-end road for these sorts of characters because they're too old and it's been done too many times. What we want are new characters facing a kind of Batman who's like the Batman in the animated series. He doesn't really change. And when we start off, Batman's in the Batcave, he's doing what he does, and then something new hits his radar and he goes and tackles it. And that's really the fun of reading these comics. That's the way I would fix the DC universe. Whew, there'd probably be a lot more to it, but this video's gone long enough. So I hope comics survive. I think they will. They'll just show up in a new form, and I think the DC universe will ultimately close down for a while, but then show up in licensed products, much like you see some of the stuff at Disney. And I think you're going to see that at Marvel too. So anyway, that's my rant. Thanks for listening.